Dr. Stephen Stern at St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village. About 50 or 60 doctors and nurses standing by in scrubs. The entire entrance to the emergency room was lined with stretchers covered with white sheets, had burns.
Of course, they're being treated in a number of area hospitals, including St. Vincent's, NYU. Downtown is just about 5 minutes away. As a spokesperson told us earlier, they've had a lot of experience dealing with problems at the World Trade Center from that February terrorist bombing in 1993. And obviously, they have all been mobilized, and emergency crews are working feverishly outside the World Trade Center.
You are looking at a live picture of Lower Manhattan at 11 o'clock East Coast time on a day of tragedy and terror in the United States. You're looking at what remains of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Earlier this morning, just before 9 o'clock and just after 9 o'clock, two planes and individual attacks struck each tower of the World Trade Center, causing gaping holes in both towers. You're looking at a tape now after the first impact. And there is the second impact of a large jet flown, we now believe, deliberately into the second tower. It was a short time after that the towers collapsed. And then there was an attack in Washington, D.C. We now have confirmed reports that a plane crashed into the Pentagon. We have no reports of confirmed injuries or death. However, it's clear officials all across the country are now saying this is a deliberate terrorist attack on the United States. As Tom has put it so far this morning, this is a declaration of war by terrorists against the United States.
And of course, we should mention, by the way, Tom, before we talk about terrorism, that another large plane crashed as well, just north of Somerset County Airport, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a Boeing 767 that crashed around 10 o'clock this morning. And it is unclear whether the crash was related to the other crashes that took place this morning.
President Bush is en route back to Washington. The State Department has been evacuated. There's been that attack on the Pentagon. That has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. There will be an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. This is the most serious attack on the United States since Pearl Harbor. There has never been a terrorist attack of this magnitude, in fact, on any country in the world so far as we can tell. The untold loss of life in New York alone. We only know that there have been hundreds of burn victims brought to various hospitals. Both Twin Trade Tower centers have collapsed to the ground. That's a densely populated area, obviously. We don't know the number of casualties yet at the Pentagon, and we don't know the number of deaths in that plane that went down, as Katie pointed, north of Pittsburgh.
And what we've left out a piece of information, and we know for a fact that one of these planes that was crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked from Boston this morning. It was American Airlines Flight 11 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. We had reports it had been diverted to JFK, and a short time later, perhaps while feigning a landing at JFK, it veered dramatically into the World Trade Center.
All air travel has been stopped. Airports have been closed across the country to planes departing. In terms of planes that are en route, it is unclear if they've made emergency landings or if they're reaching their final destinations. The White House has been evacuated. The State Department, the CIA has been evacuated. Of course, many, many buildings in Manhattan and Lower Manhattan have been evacuated as well.
And transatlantic flights to this country are being diverted to Canada. Still, no claim of responsibility that is verifiable or credible at this time. Yasser Arafat has condemned this attack, saying it's shocking and appalling.
Of course, we should mention back in February of 1993 was when that bomb went off in the garage of the World Trade Center, killing 6 people, injuring 1,000 people. And that, of course, was an unbelievable scene. But compared to this
is what they intended to do back then.
Minor. Let's go to Bob Hager, who has some information for us. Bob?
Katie, I was just thinking as you commented there about the various planes involved. The one that we know of so far, because it's confirmed by American Airlines, is that Flight 11, which had been scheduled from Boston's Logan Airport to Los Angeles, that Flight 11 was hijacked this morning, and it is presumed that it may have been one of the planes that went into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. There were at least 2 more planes involved in this because the other tower was hit, and then the Pentagon was also, there were eyewitness accounts that it was a plane that went into the Pentagon, but so far we don't know the sources of those planes, whether they were commercial planes that had been hijacked, whether they were private planes, whether they'd been hijacked at all. And I would point out the report from Somerset County, Pennsylvania, is so far just local authorities commenting. The FAA has not confirmed that crash, so we're waiting to hear more, and I'm hearing just now, bear with me.
Bob.
Oh, FAA is now confirming, so this adds to those earlier rumors that there are several airplanes that are unaccounted for. So there were some rumors that there might have been other planes hijacked that we didn't yet know the outcome of it. And now the FAA is confirming that there are several, was the word I heard, several planes that are unaccounted for that were evidently hijacked and has not come to a conclusion yet.
Bob, we'd like you to get a list of as many of those as you can, as specifically as possible. We're going to show you now, we're going to replay a tape of the second attack on the World Trade Centers in slow-mo. There's the plane. As you can see, a large airline-type plane. And now the collision. Flown deliberately into the second one.
When they say several, Bob, do they give you any indication of what they're talking about?
Several is the description that I had, and that was just passed on to me a moment ago, so I wasn't talking personally to the FAA person, but several is the account I had.
And Bob, American Airlines, the Flight 11 out of Boston, do we know what exactly kind of plane that was and perhaps how many people were on board?
We do not yet, but I think we're going to get some additional information from American. They were supposed to be adding comment to this from Dulles Airport here in a few moments, so we might learn a little bit more about that. But right now, it's very important to worry about rumors and so forth. I'd like to hear some more confirmation that a plane really has crashed in Pennsylvania, for instance, since the FAA hasn't confirmed that. But I think one needs to be very careful here in this chaotic situation.
We have a report here that Osama bin Laden, who is often identified as the world's leading terrorist, warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interest for his support of Israel, an Arab journalist with access said to him Tuesday in London.
Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Qud al-Arabi newspaper, said Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden was almost certainly behind the attack of the World Trade Center in New York. Quote, it's most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interest in an unprecedented attack, a very big one, Atwan told Reuters.
He has interviewed bin Laden, and he maintains close contact with his followers, according to Reuters. So that's the first report that we've had that Osama bin Laden may have been responsible. Obviously, it was a very sophisticated organization, carefully coordinated. It had to have its origins in this country. Louis Freeh, the FBI director, as he left office, said that his continuing great concern with the number of terrorist cells that exist in America, not just in some shadowy enclave in Afghanistan or somewhere in the subcontinent, but they've taken root in this country because it's so easy to get here.
Let's talk a little bit more about Osama bin Laden, because as you say, he was associated with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Why don't we talk about him and what he has done here in the United States, Tom, to give people a little bit of background?
Well, he is from Saudi Arabia originally. He's wealthy. He is very sophisticated in terms of using the new technology. We believe that he is being harbored in Afghanistan. No one knows for sure. A number of people have attempted to get to him and have been unsuccessful in that. They also believe that he was behind the bombings in Kenya as well. He is obviously a zealot of great, dark passion, and most of it directed at the United States.
Brian Jenkins, our terrorist expert, remains on the phone. Brian, tell us a little bit more about Osama bin Laden and if you think that he might, in fact, have carried out this kind of well-orchestrated, horrific attack on the United States.
Well, certainly he would have to be included in any very, very short list of suspects, but it is premature to be able to say with any confidence who might be responsible. In something like this, I mean, we know what has happened, we know when it has happened, we know where it has happened, who and why. It takes a little bit longer to figure out. I have no doubt that we will ultimately be able to identify who is responsible. But until that time, we can only speculate.
But Brian, in an attack of this magnitude that is so carefully coordinated and executed with such cold-blooded efficiency, it obviously had to be a very sophisticated organization.
Clearly, this took organization, and while organization has in terrorism in recent years become more fluid, that is, we are not dealing with the identifiable terrorist organizations that we dealt with in the 1970s and 1980s. Terrorism in the last decade has been a lot more fluid, and from these universes of like-minded fanatics, people have been able to put together these ad hoc conspiracies. Nonetheless, the magnitude of this attack, the coordination involved in this attack, does indicate a considerable amount of planning and organization.
Right. Mr. Jenkins, if you'll hold for a second, I want to go back to Bob Hager of NBC. Bob, we were talking a second. Apparently, we don't have Bob at the moment. All right, let's go to Jim Kallstrom, who's the former director of the FBI's New York office. Jim, we just talked about the fact that sooner or later we'll know who did this, but where does law enforcement start? Obviously, we know that in several cases we're talking about the plane as the weapon, so to speak, but where do we start to track who's responsible?
Well, Matt, I think someone said it there, this is unprecedented. And law enforcement will start from the base of intelligence that they already have and hopefully always have. And I mean, that's the argument in the country. I mean, we have a very short memory in the United States, and maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, but that's why we need effective law enforcement. Although in a free society, as Brian Jenkins points out, and I agree with him totally, it's very, very difficult to stop things like this. I mean, the first goal would have been to stop this horrific event. And, of course, the second goal now is to save as many people as we can and to find out who did it. And thirdly, and most importantly, not let something like this happen again.
Jim, if you were starting the investigation tomorrow morning, where would you begin with the man who hijacked that American Airlines flight?
I'd probably have 100 courses of action taken simultaneously. I'm sure that's what's going on as we speak. It's a bit chaos. I mean, I just look at the TWA tragedy and why we responded the way we did. We were at a heightened threat for terrorism, and it sure looked like terrorism, and this is so much bigger than that. It's chaotic, but law enforcement's trying to make sense out of it. They're trying to obviously not let something happen again in the next 10 minutes, the next hour, the next 2 hours. So that's on the mind of public safety officials in Washington and locally. And, of course, a long-range plan to see what we can do about stopping this. You know, we live in a free society. People come and go. Our borders are open. We see that talked about on the news every night. Not so much from a terrorism standpoint, from a work standpoint. But people land at our major airports every day, undocumented. So it's extremely difficult. As Brian pointed out earlier, these terrorist cells are very insulated from each other. There's no particular hierarchy like there was in the mafia where you put a particular wiretap in at the top and you know everything that's going on. That's not the case here. We know there's tremendous hatred. I mean, we've talked about this in law enforcement for over a decade. They blew up the World Trade Center. They tried to bring the World Trade Center down. They've blown up many other government symbols, and Ramsey Youssef tried to blow up 11 jumbo jets simultaneously.
Okay, Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Katie Couric. We want to go to Pat Dawson, who's down at the World Trade Center with an official, talking to that official. Pat?
Yes, Katie, forgive me, we're just trying to get obviously, as you can imagine, Joe, go ahead, you may put the microphone on there. As you can imagine, this is a very, very difficult situation here. We are here with a couple of guests who can give us at least some insight into what's going on there. This is Chief William Hall of the Port Authority Police of New York. As we told you earlier, the Port Authority Police have jurisdiction over the Trade Center. And also Alan Rice, who's the director of the World Trade Center. Gentlemen, if I get you just to stand like that. First of all, Chief, do we have any idea of how many people are in there?
We have no idea. Now, as you know, it was pretty much rush hour time that this took place this morning. So The numbers we don't know yet. We tried to get almost everybody out that we could early on.
After the first two crashes, when the planes hit the building, there was roughly about, I would say, what, an